gratitude to all those who fought on Normandy's beaches exactly 80 years ago. 160,000 Allied troops landed across 5 French beaches on this day in 1944. It was the largest seaborne invasion in history. Mervyn Kirsch is a D-Day veteran who landed on Gold Beach. He told LBC he remembers arriving on that day.
Looking at the coast, hearing the shells go from inland to the ships and from the ships inland, made me realise it wasn't an exercise or rehearsal or game. It was a really war. And I was afraid, as probably everyone else was.
US Secretary of State for Defence Lloyd D. Austin said, sadly today we're facing the same threats as the world was 80 years ago.
We must again stand firm against aggression and tyranny. If the troops of the world's democracies could risk their lives for freedom then, surely the citizens of the world's democracy can risk our comfort for freedom now.
A rise in E. coli infections is being linked to a food delivered across the UK. Health officials say there have been 113 new cases in the UK in the last 2 weeks. The infection can cause sickness, stomach cramps and fever. TV doctor Michael Mosley has gone missing on the Greek island of Symi. The 67-year-old who helped popularise the 5-2 diet has been missing since going for a walk yesterday. A huge search and rescue operation using drones is underway. Prince Harry has been given the go-ahead to appeal a High Court ruling over the police protection he receives in the UK. Earlier this year, the Duke of Sussex lost his legal challenge against the Home Office decision to change his level of personal security when he visits. And Jack Grealish and James Maddison have been left out of the England squad for Euro 2024. Manager Gareth Southgate says there were some tough calls to make. Harry Maguire also misses out because of injury. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 38 points at 82.85. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.17. LBC weather dry for most overnight with clear spells, although showers and longer spells of rain continuing in the northwest, and a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
3 minutes past 8 on LBC. Thank you for your company this evening. If you'd like to watch this out, you can do so. We're streaming live on Global Player. That's because we have 3 guests with me in the studio. We're continuing our discussion on D-Day and what it all means. And we have 3 people from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission with us. Rich Hills is Director of Commemorations. And what a great job title that is.
Thank you very much.
Michelle Jennings is Director of Volunteering and Outreach, and Dr. George Hay is Official Historian for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Anybody that has visited, certainly, and you're responsible for war graves all around the world. This is not just in Normandy, but I've only been to the ones in Normandy. And well, actually, no, I haven't. I've been to ones in Belgium as well, where my great uncle is buried. He was killed 10 days before the end of the First World War, and we went to find his grave. It was a profoundly moving experience. I'm sure many people listening will have had the same kind of experience. But Michelle, you can tell us. I mean, I suppose you do what it says on the tin of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. But when were you formed, and how does it all operate? How are you funded?
Well, thank you for inviting us on tonight, Iain. It's a great opportunity on D-Day to talk to you about the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, a collection of words that lots of people have heard of, but they don't quite know what we do. We were founded in 1917 by a wonderful gentleman, Fabian Were, and we were founded to basically commemorate the dead, the fallen of World War I. But we have grown massively over the years. We now commemorate 1.7 million of the fallen. We maintain all those records, and we physically maintain 1.1 million memorials and headstones. And we do
1.1 million?
Yep. And we do it in 23,000 locations around the world. Wow. And 153 countries. So we are something that this country should be exceedingly proud of. We are a hidden gem. We really are.
And presumably you employ people locally to maintain the grounds, because they are, I mean, all the ones I've been to, they're just simply beautiful places, very tranquil, as you would expect, I suppose, a cemetery to be. But
absolutely.
I suppose it would be easy to let them fall into disrepair.
Well, we employ about 1,400 staff around the globe. Our largest workforce is in France, where we have about 400 staff. We also have a growing number of volunteers who help us. So, for example, in the UK, we've got 2,500 volunteers who will look after the headstones in their local churchyards. And in the last few years, we've started putting very discreet, very appropriate little signs up saying that there are Commonwealth War Graves in those locations. And the volunteers will often be involved in looking after those. But where we have bigger plots, we have a remarkable workforce. And I have to pay tribute. Our operations team all around the world, but you've seen it yourself in France and in Belgium, the care and the respect that they show to those cemeteries is breathtaking. And you wouldn't really think about it until you actually go and you've had the personal experience of a family member. You want to know that somebody is taking care of them. They have made a huge sacrifice. And so you want to know that that sacrifice is being recognised.
And the records are all there for public view as well. I can't remember which cemetery it was, but I remember looking through the names and I came across my own name, which was quite something. And I remember walking to find the grave, and it's spelled Ian the normal way, not my way, but I just sort of sat there and thought, what would his story be? How did he end up here? How long did he serve in the war? Where was he from? And you can actually find out all those details, can't you? That's the great thing, and it's not just rows and rows of headstones. There's a story behind each one.
You're absolutely right, and part of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission desire and dream for the future is that we do keep those stories alive. But yes, we commemorate and we keep the stories of all of those individuals. We've been looking this week at, people aged 17 or 18 who were killed on D-Day in 1944. I mean, it's almost impossible to contemplate a 17 or an 18-year-old being lost. And the inscriptions on their headstones and the records that we keep and the letters that were sent home are all part of their story. And it's part of our Royal Charter is to keep the records as well as maintain the cemeteries.
Well, as I say, if you've got any stories that you want to relate during the course of this hour, and indeed the next one, because we're going to continue this discussion after 9 as well, do give us a call. If you've got any questions for my three guests here over the course of this hour, we'd love to hear from you too. Now, Rich, you're Director of Commemorations. What does that involve? Because, I mean, this is an odd one in a way, isn't it? Because we don't normally mark 80 years. It's 75, then 100. Why have we decided to, or why has the international community decided to make a big thing of the 80th anniversary?
I think because this is almost a sort of watershed moment when the generation that remembers and understands the sacrifice and knows who was involved hands over to the younger generation. This is this time. It's 80 years on. There won't be too many more ceremonies where we have this amount of veterans alive. So now is a good time to educate, to inspire, to tell people the story, and then hand that legacy over.
So, and in terms of deciding how to commemorate an anniversary, I mean, let's make this a bit wider now. How do those decisions come to be made? I mean, is it something that you collectively have a big role in?
Would you like to take that one on?
Well, there's a number of sort of key campaigns and operations in history. So some sort of key turning points of the war. So you have the battles that were fought around Kohima in northeast India. You have the Great Escape from Poznan. You have Normandy. So these sort of monumental milestones during the war, where the strategic direction of the war changed, absolutely changed. So Kohima is almost a sort of Far Eastern version of Stalingrad. Normandy was the Western Front version. These are the sort of key things, and by linking the sort of stories of the people that we look after to these key battles, it helps to tell that story in these key milestones.
And how do you liaise with? Presumably, there's your equivalent in other countries, including Germany, I guess.
Oh, I mean, sorry, Michelle, can I take?
No, you can take that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, our work is all about partnerships. I mean, absolutely. We work with our member governments, the embassies and the high commissions in all countries. And we work with national governments in France and in Belgium, but we also work with our colleagues VDK, which is the German version of ourselves, and also the ONAC VG. And please don't ask me to explain what those abbreviations stand for, because I don't speak French or German. But there are sister organisations, and they work with us to recover, to identify, and to rebury casualties. So when we do our exhumations and we do our recoveries on the Western Front, they are there alongside us to help to recover the bodies, to help to identify and then to rebury them. Very much partners.
George Hay, let's come to you. You're the official historian for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Sounds very grand. Looking back to D-Day, how important is this anniversary, and how do you, and Michelle, you may have a view on this too, how do you reach out to new generations to sort of teach them how important what happened on this day in 1944 actually is?
Yeah, I find this very interesting because for very good reasons we're focusing on one day here, the 6th of June 1944, but this is just the beginning of something else. The war in Western Europe is going to rumble on for practically another year. I think everyone by this point of the day has probably heard this multiple times. But there is a significance to this day, and there are various ways in which you can pick that apart. You can look at the sheer scale of the operation, and the reason why that's worth reflecting on and thinking about, the number of people involved, the sacrifice made by those who don't come back. But I think the thing that's most striking to me is thinking about this in the wider context of the war, thinking about this going back 4 years to the point at which the British Army has been effectively routed from the continent. Western Europe has been occupied by Nazi Germany. The significance of this day, and I think why this is worth marking and why we should put all this effort into helping to educate people, helping to connect to this history, is because this is the moment that the Allies return to mainland Europe. It's only here where the war in the West can be won. It's only here where the occupied territories can be liberated. It's only here where the German army can be met in battle and defeated and brought to unconditional surrender and various other things that are hugely significant. So all of this stuff, I think, connected to this day, it's an opportunity to use it as an access point to connect people with that history and to then enable them to go away and do more and learn more and engage with this going forward. I keep saying it's a single day. This is the beginning of Operation Overlord. Overlord covers the Battle of Normandy. That battle isn't going to finish until August. So, people have probably been talking about around 4,500 casualties across all the beaches. If you take Commonwealth forces for that campaign, you're looking at ultimately around 16,000 dead. So it's hugely significant, and the impact it has in the UK across the Commonwealth is lasting, and we need to find ways to remember that and connect the next generation with that history.
And Michelle, in terms of that, we all see adverts for battlefield tours, which we all imagine are probably mainly sort of populated by middle-aged men, I guess. Maybe that's a bit of a stereotype. I actually went on one with my dad to Arnhem and some years ago. But there are lots of schools that organise trips, aren't there? Have you noticed a sort of an increase in the number of schools that are interested in doing this sort of thing this year?
I think you raise a really good point, and also to George's point that actually the 6th of June gives that entry point. It's a great thing for teenagers to remember for their exam papers, isn't it? That this marks the turning point of World War II. And if you want to have a conversation about freedom and liberation and democracy, then that's a great trigger point for you to do that. Actually, I think schools in recent years have actually been very good at visiting the cemeteries. We've certainly seen a great interest. For numbers of years, schools have been visiting Ypres, which is a World War I story all of its own, and I won't digress into that. But I think there is actually a real interest. Now, French school children, of course, are incredibly interested in the story of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. They were the ones who were liberated. So naturally, generally their interest is phenomenal. And actually Normandy is hugely appreciative of the Allied forces and the story, and they are very fluent in that story. We would like to bring that more to the fore for in our education, and we think there are ways in which we can do it, which are not just battlefield tours, but actually utilising maybe more visitor centres, developing immersive experiences, even having, you had Al Murray on earlier, even having festivals around, that collective community where you engage people in really pivotal points of history. And these are great modern ways of educating new audiences and keeping it relevant.
Well, we will hear more from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission in just a moment. They're very happy to take any questions. I've got several coming through on text and WhatsApp, but if you'd like to give us a call as well, 0345 6060 973. Doesn't have to be questions, though. We're very interested in hearing the experience that your family may have had, maybe your father, your grandfather, or indeed your mother or grandmother, because the role of women in D-Day, as we talked about last night on the programme a little bit, thanks to caller Margaret, I think has probably been completely underestimated. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 16 minutes past 8.
LBC. Matthew. Britain's Conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 18 minutes past 8. We have Rich Hills, Michelle Jennings and George Hay from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission with us. Let's take a couple of text questions first. This, actually, there's no name on this one. My great-uncle, aged 19, fought in World War II. He died and was buried in Gaza since the conflict broke out. I do wonder what has happened to the graves there. Rich?
Thanks, Iain. Yes, we have a very dedicated team who worked in Gaza. I was fortunate enough to visit them just before the current conflict broke out. The staff are all now safe, and they've managed to move away from the area with their families. So that's been a recent development, which we are absolutely delighted about. Unfortunately, we know that both of the cemeteries, Deir el-Balah and Gaza War Cemetery, have sustained an amount of damage. And we've seen footage, both on the news and also footage from our own team prior to them leaving. So yes, both cemeteries has been damaged, and in the fullness of time, we will work to get them back to the condition they were in previously. Once we can get back in and get our teams re-established, but they have taken a few hits. Absolutely.
Has that happened in previous conflicts?
Yes, well, the Commission tends to play the long game. I mean, if you cast your mind back to Beirut War Cemetery during the 80s and in Lebanon, we have a site in Mogadishu African War Cemetery, which is being very badly damaged. Some sites in Libya as well have been damaged over the years, and also our sites in Syria. And what we do is we wait until the conflict subsides. We get our staff back in, and then we start the process of rebuilding, renovation. I mean, I would say it's routine business for us, but we do it, and we have done it throughout our history. Absolutely.
Question I've just thought of: if somebody knows that they had somebody, a family member, that was killed on D-Day, does your website allow them to sort of search for them and find out exactly where they're buried?
Absolutely. Yes, we have a very, very accessible search function, and not only will you find out where they're buried, but you'll also see the inscription that is on their headstone, and we cover that for a huge number. And I think it's actually a great tool. It's probably one of our most used tools on the website, our most visited page.
Right, let's go to Stuart, who's a first-time caller in Berkhamsted. Hello, Stuart.
Oh, hi, Ian. Thanks for having me on. I'm just calling it to let you know about my Canadian uncle. He went on D-Day, and his unit, and he lied about his age when he signed up. So he was only 21 on D-Day, but having signed up at age 17. Anyway, went in on D-Day, and then his unit liberated a small French town called Perenches, which is just west of Lille. And my uncle befriended this young man who was about 12. And when the unit left, my uncle gave him some chocolate. And the young man had a photograph of himself, which he gave to my uncle. Anyway, fast forward many years, my uncle and my cousin did a dad-son trip to France in 1988 to revisit, obviously, the beaches and the various battlegrounds where my uncle had fought. And unbeknown to my uncle, my cousin had done a load of research, and he'd managed to track down this person whose photograph had been given to my uncle. And it turned out that the youngster that my uncle had befriended was the mayor of this town. So when they arrived at the town, it turned out that my uncle was the first Canadian of his unit, his small unit, to be back in the town since its liberation. And my uncle and my cousin then came over to the UK as a surprise visit, and they told us that they didn't buy a drink for 3 days, and they were just treated like royalty. But interestingly, your previous guests mentioned, obviously, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I have some connection with that because meanwhile, my father was shot down 2 years before D-Day. He was a prisoner of war in Stalag 3, and he was shot down with the map maker of The Great Escape, a guy called Des Plunkett. And I went to the anniversary of the Great Escape commemoration in Poland in March. My dad knew one of the escapers who was shot, and also one of the three who made it home. So I no doubt my dad and his colleagues were, waiting for news of the invasion. His eventual liberation came a year later, in May 45. And at the start of at the end of January, beginning of February 45, thousands of POWs were forced marched away from the advancing Russians. And my dad had to march 265 kilometres. Anyway, I'm planning to cycle that route next year on the 80th anniversary of that march, where a lot of the guys died, having the conditions were terrible, and also some of them suffered being strafed by their own side. And but in terms of the Commonwealth, when my dad was shot down with Des Plunkett, 3 of the guys died on this Sterling, the youngest of whom was only 19. My dad was just 22. He was a navigator. And I've been to the graveyard where the 3 crew are buried, and it's in Bergen on the west coast of Holland. And there's a part of that municipal graveyard which is Commonwealth Graves cared for, and it is absolutely immaculate. And I did go a couple of years ago for the 80th anniversary of them losing their lives. And also your contributors also mentioned Kohima. My dad's brother was in the Chindits fighting in Burma at the time when D-Day occurred. So there was a real sort of family affair going on. My Canadian uncle and my dad and my uncle all doing their various bits, but obviously my uncle having direct involvement in D-Day.
Well, that's a very comprehensive roundup of virtually every war that's ever been fought.
Yes. So interesting. My dad was shot down on his 23rd mission in June 42, having been shot down in May 42 in a friendly fire incident. But thankfully, all 8 of the crew bailed out and successfully and survived. But the month later, they weren't so lucky. But no, I think it's interesting. When I went to the anniversary of the Great Escape, there were 13, and this is very much echoes the multinational effort that D-Day was, but there were 13 nationalities involved in the Great Escape, and the ambassador, the Polish ambassador, mentioned that this year is also the 75th anniversary of NATO's formation, the 25th anniversary of Poland joining NATO as well. So lots of significant anniversaries this year.
Stuart?
And
I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. A text here from Rick who says, just wondering, are the remains of soldiers buried with the headstones in France, or are the stones there as memorials?
Well, globally, almost all of the headstones that you see have remains buried under them. But you will find cases where there'll be a headstone which says in the municipal cemeteries. And the last gentleman caller mentioned the fact that the graves were in a municipal site. Some municipal sites, some of the exact locations may not be known. So you may occasionally find a headstone which says believed to be buried somewhere in this graveyard.
And there are quite a few graves where there is a body buried, but the identity is unknown.
Thousands and thousands. So places like Tynecott, the vast majority of the graves in Tynecott are unknown soldiers. I'd like to say, Ian, that you mentioned earlier on about our records. There's a constant body of work that we do to identify, and we get many submissions from the public, and we work with the public to identify many of the soldiers that are buried in unknown graves. That's a constant process that we do.
Right, let's go to Susie in St Albans. Susie, hi.
Oh, hi, Ian. Nice to speak to you. I'll tell you what, I'm South African, although I married an Englishman, so I've been here since 1973. But what I noticed, so all my family fought in the wars. My one uncle my great uncle is buried in Gaza somewhere because he went there. I don't know. The rumor is he went to be a spy. My uncle was shot down, Pat Glenton, in North Africa. Nobody knows where he is. My father, although he sustained an eye injury and was considered unfit, insisted on going and worked on the hospital ships. And everyone I know, my best friend's mother was a nurse, and her fiancé was killed. She married somebody she nursed post-war injury, who never really recovered. We grew up, he never really recovered from the effects of his war injuries because he lay in the desert for 3 days before anyone found him. But what I want, so bearing in mind how much South Africa, it was the English speaking, not the Afrikaans, because the Afrikaans South Africans was supporting Germany, fought in the war and the role they played in the war. Why is it that it feels, because I used to lay the wreath in the Commonwealth War Grave in Oxford, and it was almost like South Africa's been deleted because it's politically not correct, or it's just odd.
Well, let's go to our resident official historian for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Okay, no, fine. Let's get the answer.
Well, I think reading between the lines, I think what you're saying is maybe in certain places you're not seeing South African graves or South African commemorations. The really important, fundamental aspect of the way in which the Commission works is it's going to commemorate you where you died. They're not going to repatriate you. They're not going to move your body from the battlefield back to wherever your home might be, if that's South Africa. And there's a whole lot of background to why they choose to do that, and it's rooted in the First World War, and it's rooted in equality. But what it means is sometimes you won't see that much diversity at certain cemeteries or certain memorials because it is representative of the people who died in a given locality. So there will be places where you'll see far more South Africans. speaking about the wrong war, but if you're on the Western Front, looking around the battlefields along the Somme, if you go to the Thiepval Memorial, it contains the names of the British fallen, but also South Africans in that case, and there are plenty of other sites where you'll be able to find them. But that's the key point. So there are often cases where the diversity doesn't appear to be there, but it's simply because it's a reflection of who's died where. Yeah.
Dermot says, I don't have a question for your guests, I just want to thank them. See, that's the kind of listener we have on this show.
Nice.
Really nice people.
Thank you very much.
Many more of them will get in touch over the course of the next half an hour. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Darryl Jackson.
A day of commemorations have come to an end in Normandy to mark 80 years since D-Day. The King and Queen joined world leaders to pay tribute to the 160,000 Allied troops who played a pivotal role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. The mayor of the Greek island of Symis exclusively told LBC that he fears TV doctor Michael Mosley may have fainted because of high temperatures and fallen off a cliff. A huge search is being carried out for the 67-year-old who hasn't been seen since going for a walk yesterday. And a fire caused by an e-bike has nearly destroyed a house in northwest London and left 2 people in hospital. Firefighters are blaming a catastrophic failure of the battery pack in Harrow and are again warning people not to leave them unattended while they're charging. LBC weather dry for most overnight with some clear spells, showers and longer spells of rain continuing in the northwest and a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hey, you.
Text 84850. This is LBC.
8:34 on LBC. We have Rich Hills, Director of Commemorations at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission with us, Michelle Jennings, Director of Volunteering and Outreach, and Dr George Hay, the official historian for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Let's go back to your calls. Phil is in New York. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Hi, good, thank you.
I was on your call yesterday, and I was at 58 minutes to close.
Remember, and I did urge you to phone in tonight. I'm glad you have done.
Yes, so I have done. Incidentally, I was extremely moved by the story about your dad visiting the German war cemetery. And you can still hear my voice. I'm extremely moved by that. I thought that was outstanding.
Well, whenever I talk about it, I get choked up as well, Phil. So it was just one of those moments because, look, my dad was like 10 years old when the war broke out, and the war just had the most dramatic effect on his whole life. And I won't say he wanted to sort of relive it all the time, but going to that German cemetery was quite cathartic, I think, in some ways for him, which is why, I mean, he was not a man given to tears, but he did have tears in his eyes from walking around that, which I can completely get. Anyway, that's not why you phoned in.
No, I want to follow up on the history, because I was really surprised with the students that you had phoned in saying that not many of them, if any of them, had covered World War II or even World War One in their history classes. And so I wanted to highlight to everybody, and hopefully some of those students are still listening, that in 1973, I think it was, Jeremy Isaacs produced a TV documentary, which is, without doubt, it says, the best documentary ever produced, giving an accurate and epic depiction of World War II, from the invasion of Poland in 1939 to the end of the war in 1945. And it was called The World at War, and it was narrated by Laurence Olivier. And I have all the 26 episodes plus about 10 extra episodes they did make. And it's an outstanding documentary that was made because Jeremy, I remember seeing a documentary with Jeremy Isaacs on the making of it, and he wanted to capture the people that were still living, not just from the Allied side, but from all of the Axis side as well. And I think if the younger generation want to know about the World War, then this is the documentary you should get, the DVDs, and you should watch.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've got it. I've watched it all probably about 3 times over the past 20 years. It is the most amazing series. And if you feel that you don't have a great knowledge of the Second World War, well, it's a great place to start. It's a shame there aren't. I mean, there are lots of war documentaries, aren't there? But some of them, I think, they assume a lot of knowledge and a bit inaccessible to some people. I mean, George, what would you recommend if people wanted to learn a bit more?
The World at War is fantastic. Yeah, it stands out, I think, as being something very different compared to maybe what we get fed in this day and age. I think also something that's maybe done a bit of a disservice to D-Day, the history of D-Day, is some of the big budget films. I won't mention any names, but there are some historical films like The Longest Day, which are really good. That would give people an access point if that's what we want to talk about. But obviously we have to talk about things like books as well. And there are some fantastic accessible histories out there that people can find. But yeah, we can recommend lots of those, but I won't do that either. But The Internet is Your Friend, or Monty's Men, is one that people can go and Google because it's a fantastic book and it's a really good coverage of the war in North West Europe.
Right, let's go to Paul in Newcastle. Hello, Paul. Paul, are you there?
I am. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just interested to know if a war grave marker could be reinstated. What happened? My great uncle was killed in the Second World War. He was from County Durham and he flew with the Royal Australian Air Force. He was a rear gunner, and he was killed at RAF Driffield. So what happened was he was brought home and he was buried in the local cemetery. In the 60s, the council landscaped the cemetery and his grave marker was removed. So his name appears on the war memorial, but we don't know where he is. And it would be nice if there was some way we could mark that grave, maybe by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And his cousin was killed a couple of months later, who also served in the RAF. So he's buried there.
Well, surely the parish records show you where the grave would be.
We know vaguely where he is, but the grave isn't marked, if you see what I mean.
Well, I know my grandmother, where she's buried in Norfolk, her grave isn't marked either, but it's quite clear from the map of the graveyard where it is.
Yeah, well, I live in County Durham, things are a bit different.
Rich?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, thank you. we, as I alluded to, we constantly work with members of the public to find lost graves and to put headstones markers back onto graves. And so what I'd urge you to do is if you could write into our inquiries team at inquiries@cwgc.org, or you can find that on our website, and you give us your details, all the history behind it, and if your relative died in service during the war years and the years that we commemorate, then my team can research that, and then we can look at that. And if the grave has been lost, then we can look to do something about it. But you know, so I would urge you to submit all that to us, and then we can have a look at it for you.
And can you tell us anything about your great uncle, his war experiences?
Yeah, well, he worked at a colliery. He worked in the what they call the brick flats. So he used to hand make bricks. And he was called up, and he served in the Royal Australian Air Force for some strange reason, 466 Squadron, even though he was from County Durham. So what happened was they'd been on a raid over Germany, came back, and there was some problem with the aeroplane when they got back, and it crash landed. He was the only one that was killed, and his sister, who's recently died, said she remembered the rest of the crew come to the funeral at the local cemetery. But after that, that's all we know. It was in February 1943 he was killed.
Yeah. That's a tragic story.
I think he was only 22 and left behind a wife and 2 children.
I was just going to say, it might be worth, if you haven't done it already, visiting the National Archives in Kew, because they have various RAF records that might enable you to trace a little bit more of that history, learn about the raid that he was on, and learn about the accident. I think Air Historical Branch also might carry some records about accidents. So there's possibly more you can dig out about that story.
Chris in Perth says, The World at War is on YouTube, all the episodes. So there you go. You don't even have to fork out 30 quid for the box set. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Nicholas, who's a first-time caller in Taunton. Nicholas, hi.
Hiya. You and I talk every night, and we share a bottle of wine with Miss Chardonnay.
And I didn't even know. I've obviously drunk too much of it. What would you like to say, Nicholas?
I listen to you every night, and thank goodness you're back. I miss you terribly. Anyway, we're going to be D-Day today. Nobody ever talks about Malta. Why is that?
Why do you think it is?
Well, my father was in Malta with the RAF for 5 years. They were bombed every day for 5 years. And nobody ever mentions it. He came back with PTSD, and his young Italian wife had divorced him. And her name is Clarke, Clarke, because he was an Irish Catholic. And my father couldn't get a job after the war. And so he had to drop the E to get a job. But he was there for 5 years, bombed every day. And nobody ever talks about it.
I mean, obviously, we're talking about D-Day at the moment because it is the anniversary. But well, George, you comment on this. Is it that there are? We were talking last night about the war in the Far East. That doesn't get the coverage that the war in Europe does. The fact that the Soviet Union made a massive contribution. I mean, Jonathan Dibley's got this great book out at the moment, made a massive contribution to winning the war. And again, we don't really talk about that as much as we do sort of the consequences of D-Day.
Yeah, I think, I mentioned earlier that D-Day is fantastic as providing people with an access point to some of this history and getting them involved, getting them interested. But, we do things like that at the expense of some of these more forgotten parts of the history of the Second World War. I don't want to take the focus away from Malta at all, but Burma is the famous example, the forgotten army. These men who go on fighting after victory in Europe has already taken place, and the country back at home effectively, laying back thinking, hooray, it's all over, and they have to go on fighting. But yeah, there's plenty of fronts that do not get the coverage that they deserve. All I would say that it's from the perspective of the Commission, they're treated in exactly the same way, commemorated in perpetuity wherever they are, wherever they fell.
Right, we'll come to more of your calls in just a moment here on LBC. It's 8:45.
This is LBC.
Cruise
Britain's Conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:47. Some breaking news which The Guardian are reporting, that Keir Starmer is going to promise to recognise a Palestinian state in the Labour Party manifesto, which will be published next Thursday. So we're going to change things around on the programme a bit, and we're going to ask you for your views on that after 9 o'clock. With us in the studio, Rich Hills, Michelle Jennings and Dr George Hay from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. They are listening avidly to your calls. If you've got a question for them, feel free to ring in right now. Mark is the first-time caller in Rutland. Mark, hello.
Hello, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
My uncle, Dennis Copping, disappeared, I think at the date, the 28th of June, 1942. He was flying his aeroplane, and it wasn't a Spitfire, it was a Kitty Hawk, back to Alamein, but disappeared. And it was in 2012 that he was found by some Italian archaeologists.
2012, wow.
Yeah, so it was all over the papers. I think the Daily Mail did a spread on it, and so did the Sun. They tried to recover the plane, and I was invited to go out there and sent off my toothbrush for DNA, etc. But because of the Arab Spring, it sort of got lost, really. So one of the questions I was going to ask is, well, the plane was actually never came back. It got mounted on a plinth in Cairo, I think. But sadly, Dennis never really got sort of repatriated or got a proper burial or a site, as it were.
So what happened to his remains?
Well, we don't know. There were some bones that were found. I mean, I sent off my toothbrush for DNA, but it sort of got lost in the Egyptian museum somewhere, unfortunately. So it never got fully sort of sorted, really.
Is this something that you all could help with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We do recover sets of remains reasonably regularly around the world, and we have obviously on the Western Front is a prime example, but we do recover them in other countries like Egypt and North Africa, and we have a process for that. And when Commonwealth war remains are recovered and identified, we, the Commission, work very closely with the member governments in country to secure the remains and then to identify them and then to take them into our care. So this is a very interesting case, but this is something that we do quite often. So I'm just a bit surprised to sort of hear that the remains disappeared, because we had they been alerted to the government and to the member governments and the British Embassy in Cairo, we would have picked that up and worked with them to bury them.
The RAF did get involved because there was a salvage operation that went on, but because of the Arab Spring, it sort of got lost, really. But it never really, that I know of, came to fruition or got finalised. So, yeah, and there was a documentary done on it. I was watching, it was something on YouTube or one of the channels a couple of weeks ago, and it popped up, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. But I never really heard anything more about it, unfortunately.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to Emma, who's a first-time caller, calling in from Toulouse in France. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Hi. Now, it says on my screen here that you knew a rather famous person associated with D-Day.
Yes, I did, and it's extraordinary to think, really, that I must be one of the few people left to actually remember him really well. He was a very close friend of my father's.
We should explain who we're talking about. Field Marshal Montgomery.
Field Marshal Montgomery, yes. And my father was chief. I mean, I'm ringing because it was my uncle who died in the Normandy landings. And, I've always had this extraordinary feeling about my uncle because I don't remember him. I mean, I was exactly a year old when he died. In fact, it was a day before my first birthday. But because my father and my other uncle were very big in the war, my uncle was rather sort of forgotten about in a way. But he's always remained a sort of mysterious person in my life. But I was thinking about it because I must be one of the last people who can remember very well Field Marshal Montgomery.
He was in some ways a very popular man, but a difficult man as well, from what I've read.
He was very he was extraordinary. It was a real privilege to have known him. I was very, very lucky. I met him he was staying with my parents, and I'd heard of him. Of course, I'd known all about him in my life, but he was charming, absolutely charming. And he had all these incredible medals. And I said, "What are all those medals?" And he said, "If you can tell me what all those medals are, I'll give you £1." and this was back in 1960 maybe. And I'm now 81, you see, so it's way back. Anyway, I went to Spinks in London and I looked up all his medals and I wrote to him and I said, "I know what all your medals were," and I listed them. And he said, "You can come to lunch." And I went down to see him in his home in Kent. I think it was in Kent, where he had his caravan, which he'd used in the war, and where he'd sat throughout the war with all the pictures of Rommel on the walls and his plans and everything. He was an extraordinary man. But basically, it was my lost uncle I was thinking about last week, who nobody really spoke very much about. He must have been incredibly young and very much loved by the family. But, you know, people just accepted death like that. You know, just everybody had a death in their family, I suppose. And it was just one of those extraordinary, weird things now that one can't really understand.
Well, it's fascinating that you've called in, Emma, because as you say, I don't know how many people there are still alive who knew Montgomery, but I mean, one of the iconic figures of the Second World War from the Allied side anyway. Emma, thank you. Let's go to Rob, who's a first-time caller in Chelmsford. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Ian. Hi. I was calling in to just share my experiences as a head of history at a very large comprehensive school, and how we do have a very healthy diet of the First and Second World Wars, and how it is a big feature of our history department's curriculum. One feature of that is that I'm taking a school trip out to Belgium and France in July. So we're taking 80 students over to France and Belgium for 3 days. And it is sometimes a little bit disappointing to hear people talk about schools and schools when we pride ourselves on making sure that this is still part of the curriculum.
How far does the conduct of the war feature in the curriculum? When I was at school, it was the causes of the First World War, the causes of the Second World War, but that was about it. Has it changed since then?
Oh, it does. Yeah. Well, the GCSE modules that you select are really down to your choice as a department, and where your specialist teachers might have particular knowledge. But we have a conflict and tension unit in our GCSE which covers the period from 1894 up until 1918. So we cover the causes and the conflicts. So we will go through in quite significant detail the war on the Western Front, or we touch on the Eastern Front for understanding the wider issues in the war. And then we also deal with the war at sea. So it is a very detailed course, which probably takes about 4 months of us. So it is a key feature of what we do at GCSE. Now, they don't cover the Second World War in the same detail at GCSE. I think it's perhaps trickier to cover as a conflict.
And have you taken groups to Belgium and France before?
Oh yeah, I've been taking school trips over to France and Belgium since I started teaching in 2008, and now we regularly take a group over each year, except for the break with COVID.
Sure.
So
and what do the kids get out of it when they come back after the trip? Do you notice sort of any changes? Sort of they're more interested in the whole subject?
Well, it's an incredibly important trip, and it is very oversubscribed as well. We have a very large school, lots of GCSE students, and we can only take 80 because of the challenge of taking large groups away overseas for 3 days. And it's very disappointing when students are unfortunately not able to get onto the trip. But it is a really important trip for the students when you speak to them at the end of their school career, when they leave at 18, that they will recall back to that moment when they were walking through Tyne-Cot or Delville Wood or any of the Somme battlefields, or we visit French battlefields, French cemeteries, German cemeteries, and it is something that they will recall and their parents recall as well, because our school has been teaching generations and taking those same families to France and Belgium in a very similar trip. My issue now is that I would love to take groups over to Normandy and to share the Second World War with them in the same way. But if I do that, I'm worried that schools will stop going to France and Belgium to the First World War battlefields and to the cemeteries and to pay their respects. And I was wondering whether the Commonwealth Graves expert has seen a drop in numbers from school visits, or whether he thinks that is still being maintained.
Michelle?
I think the numbers are still being maintained, but there is scope to really grow them, actually. I think there is. I think it's really reassuring to hear about these visits, these school visits to Belgium, and that, Tyne-Cot is a wonderful place to go. And if school children are being, very mindful and reflective of their visits there, I think that is terrific. We're currently renovating the Menin Gate, and that will reopen next year. We've invested almost, I think it's going on for €5 million in the restoration of the Menin Gate, and that is an incredible focal point in Ypres for youngsters to go and see. But to the caller's point about Normandy, I think there's a lot more to be done. There's almost been a gap in how we tell the story about World War II, and actually so much more now is available to us, and things like, the wonderful ceremonies that we've seen today has really put focus on D-Day. We have 20 cemeteries in Normandy, and I really do think with visitor centres and a programme around making it more interesting for youngsters, and as I said earlier, more immersive experiences, it will be really interesting for young people.
Final question from Martin in Harrow. Great discussion tonight. Where is the furthest flung Commonwealth War Graves cemetery? I recall stumbling across one in dusty Haifa in the 80s, which was immaculately maintained and contained many Australian war graves. Furthest one?
Well, we have cemeteries in 155 countries and territories, apart from Antarctica is the only continent, so there are many, many, many far-flung, but I'm just going to draw attention to our smallest constructed cemetery, which is the 4 casualties to unknown that are buried on Ocracoke Island in the Outer Banks. And incidentally, one of my colleagues who I serve with, his grandfather is buried in that site, and it's on a remote island off the North Carolina coast.
Rich Hills, Michelle Jennings and George Hay, thank you very much indeed for joining us over the last hour. Now, in the next hour, it's been revealed tonight by The Guardian newspaper that Keir Starmer is planning to use the Labour manifesto to make his strongest commitment yet on Palestinian statehood, in a move which he believes, according to The Guardian, will shore up the party's core support on the left. People who've seen the document say the Labour leader is expected to include a pledge to recognise Palestine before the end of any peace process, and to make sure such a move does not get vetoed by a neighbouring country. Now, the manifesto is being finalised at the moment. It's going to be published on Thursday next week. Is this a wise promise for the Labour leader to make? Your calls next. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global